This episode is brought to you by Fuli Gemstones.
I mean, if you see a piece, you're going to say, oh, that's Jay-Z's piece. Oh, that's Biggie's Jesus piece. Oh, that's Ghostface's, arm eagle pendant. So they want to be different and stand out, and they want you to be able to look at a piece and know that that's their piece.
I'm Carol Woolton, the voice of jewellery. Welcome to If Jewels Could Talk. I'm an author and broadcaster, and the woman who initiated the role of jewellery editor at magazines like Tatler and Vogue. This is a podcast for everyone, for people who do like jewellery, for people who don't realise they like jewellery, and anyone intrigued by fascinating facts, new ideas and forgotten histories. So join me as I tell sparkly tales and meet all sorts of people, delving into 4 centuries of jewellery culture and investigate what's happening now. We started our series of American shows 2 weeks ago with the incredible story of creativity in jewellery from David and Sybil Yearman, the iconic American jewellers. And today we're continuing the series. I'll be talking with Vikki Tobak, who is the author of Ice Cold, which explores the history of hip-hop jewellery. And indeed, she's also curated an exhibition of the same name at the American Natural History Museum. As she says, the history of jewellery is woven into the fabric of music, and that's what we'll be talking about today, the relationship between these two creative fields. Vikki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we are actually surrounded by bling, and we are locked in. It's sort of really a bling vault, really, here at the Mineral Hall. So if you hear a little echo, it's because we're actually in here. We're surrounded by the diamonds, glass, and a stone floor. So Vikki, this is exploring the dialogue between culture, adornment, and identity in hip-hop. And why are you so interested in that subject?
It is a big story, not just for New York and hip-hop, but, it's a story as old as time. What we wear, what we put on our bodies has been used to communicate status, wealth, storytelling. I'm someone that, came up loving hip-hop. I worked in the music business in the early 90s and started writing about the music, and was particularly interested in what was it that hip-hop used as ways of identifying itself. What did hip-hop look like? And for anyone kind of in New York during those times, especially like 80s, 90s, fashion, jewelry especially, communicated so much. I mean, the street, the clubs where this culture was taking place, the looks and all of this kind of adornment that went along with it was growing and changing too. So there was a big story here to tell. And, I wanted to tell it, like you said, first in the book, and now in this great exhibition at the American Museum of Natural History.
So what were you doing in the music industry? What were you working at?
So I worked for a record label called Payday Records Empire Management in the early 90s. At the time, we represented a young Jay-Z for a singles deal, Gangstar, Show and AG, a lot of kind of golden era artists of the time. I was their director of marketing, so responsible for everything from, arranging photo shoots, press releases, kind of getting the artists out into the world in the way that they wanted to be seen. So, I worked with a lot of photographers, but also with a lot of, stylists, fashion editors, designers, and jewelers in that were also kind of coming up at that same time. So, I consider myself really lucky to have kind of seen that as it was happening with that access, because, writing this book and also doing this exhibit and getting people to lend their stuff required so much relationships and trust of, things that I had to really kind of dig back into, those days for sure.
So were you out getting involved in the music? Were there artists that you particularly followed and you went to every time they performed?
Yeah, I mean, I was a fan, I was a kid, I was a fan, and I, worked and had like really great access and proximity. So, all the artists kind of those times, Young Jay-Z, Eric B. and Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, Roxanne Shante, all of them, Slick Rick, Nas, I thought that they were some of the greatest artists of our time and still do.
Tell me how you think hip hop really originated. How did it start? Was that in the 70s?
Yeah, I mean, there's an origin story of, that hip hop started in New York in the 70s, DJ Kool Herc, that's sort of the origin story, mixed two, records together at a party, and, hip hop was born. But, hip hop is, a music that continues on, Black culture and Black music. And so there were kind of pockets popping up, primarily New York, but then kind of everywhere, Atlanta, New York, Atlanta, LA, Houston, Detroit, which is the town, where I grew up before I moved to New York. And so it's something that was created by, people that, didn't always have access to, music production and, the clubs that were playing mainstream music. So they, made it up and created something from scratch, which is, just such a beautiful thing.
Do you think it needed that moment in the 70s of political upheaval to make it thrive, to create it?
Yeah, I mean, look, just like a diamond is created under pressure, hip hop was created under pressure. Not to sound cliche, but that pressure creates diamonds and shining and beauty. But of course, it comes from circumstances that were quite serious. And you listen to the early lyrics, you listen to the storytelling, and they tell you,
What they felt like a neglected community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, that this tradition of remixing, making it up from scratch, originating, all these kind of things that you see, you hear in the music, but you also see in the jewelry. This jewelry is so different, bigger, bolder, the designs, the kind of show of like allegiance and brotherhood that it communicates. It's like nothing that came before it. So it's all tied in from the circumstances, for sure.
I've just written this book called the same name as the podcast, If Jewels Could Talk, and in it I talk about brooches. And I sort of feel that we lost the art of protest through jewellery. But actually what you're saying is this really is a form of protest.
You could definitely call it that. I think early jewelry, especially in like the 80s, right? Because it was meant as a symbol of who you were in the community, to show status, to show power. And, only certain people could wear the jewelry, both for safety and, for just being able to afford it. So a lot of the early rappers with the big, gold like dookie chains and, big 4-finger rings and things like that, they emulated the people in the community that had money a lot of times, which were the hustlers, the drug dealers, things like that. So that style is rooted in people in the community who had money and were living well, right? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what hip hop wanted to communicate as a protest to the day-to-day, right, that they were seeing. But along with that, also came, danger of like, you had to kind of signify that you had some kind of protection, or, like chain snatching and all of that was very prominent, in those days. You hear about it in the music, and you hear about it in every day. So yeah, it's a really complex story of how it's worn and by who.
So who was the first? Who was the first adopting this outrageous jewelry style? Who do you attribute it to?
Artist-wise, you mean?
Yes.
So, Slick Rick is very, is considered kind of the godfather of all of this. But, along with him, you also had artists like Biz Markie, also another great originator, Eric B. and Rakim, Roxanne Shante, Salt and Peppa. They were like all early women that also, wore the big hoop earrings and also the big jewelry and the rings. So those are some of the earlier names.
So do you think earlier they were using the gold Cuban chains and gold more than the diamonds?
Yeah, so primarily in the 80s, it was just kind of, gold and yellow gold at that. Mm-hmm. That was, and, a lot of the jewelers that were servicing the community were like community jewelry stores. You had Albee Square Mall in Brooklyn, you had the Coliseum Mall in Queens. Everywhere were kind of like neighborhood jewelry stores that would make grills, that would make, specific chain links and things like that. And so the artists started going to these early jewelers and they got known and they started getting like name dropped in songs. Tito Caicedo, the jeweler, Jacob and Co, of course, or big early in the hip hop world. And then you had Eddie Plain, who did Eddie's Gold Teeth, that did a lot of early grills and things like that. So the jewelers kind of came up as the artists came up. As hip hop started kind of going more mainstream in the 90s, even into the 2000s, people wanted to do bigger and bolder and different from what came before them, because hip hop is a very kind of competitive sport, if you will. So they started using white gold, platinum, and then diamonds, of course, which were so much more expensive to have in your gold. So that's something that kind of came along that, artists like, Jay-Z were known for kind of making that transition. And that was definitely moved things. And then later you see kind of different materials come into play with Pharrell, with the multicolored stones, Gucci Mane also with like different anime designs. So there's definitely a progression, right, of like styles with different artists and different moments of how hip hop itself changed.
So they're not just trying to be part of a community of hip hop, they're also trying to self-identify and identify each other. So to move away from the pack.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you see a piece, you're going to say, oh, that's Jay-Z's piece. Oh, that's Biggie's Jesus piece. Oh, that's Ghostface's, arm eagle pendant. So they want to be different and stand out, and they want you to be able to look at a piece and know that that's their piece.
And so from the gold, they move on to diamonds, but there's predominantly diamonds, isn't it? It's not really color.
Yeah. I mean, now, you hear about it all the time. Iced out chain, flooded chain, bust down watches. I mean, diamonds are definitely the language of modern day hip hop for sure. But yeah, going back as well.
What do you think they think about lab grown?
That's been a topic of conversation for sure. We're at this funny time, right, with lab grown, where it's becoming more, more used, especially, the artists perform in a lot of these pieces. So the pieces get a lot of wear and tear and are on the road. So, I don't know, I think if you would ask most artists, they still would want natural.
Good for them.
But, I think just like in other parts of the jewelry world, I think people are learning and deciding.
But if it's a big part of saying, this is how well I've done, this is my wealth, you need mined diamonds because they keep their value and the lab grown don't. And I think it's probably important for them that they're aligned with that.
Keeping it real?
Yeah. And so what were the grills about? How did those start?
So grills are like a whole fascinating subculture within the culture of hip hop jewelry. You know, tooth adornment and grills have been part, like the ancient Etruscans, the Mayans used jade in their teeth. And, you know, all over the world, you know, gold teeth has been used for like dental care. An amazing story, Eddie Plain immigrated from Suriname as a dental technician, immigrated to Brooklyn, New York with his brother Lando, and started, you know, making these gold teeth from kids from the neighborhood who loved, you know, to kind of wear some adornment in their mouth. Like it was just different. Word started to spread. He started to make more. He opened up a shop in the Coliseum Mall next to this like company called Shirt Kings that made a lot of aerosol art fashion at the time. And those two kind of booths next to each other, people would come there and get grills and then get like an aerosol jacket. And people started doing, you know, all kinds of grill designs, right? Like RZA from Wu-Tang Clan and ODB did like fang grills. People would get
and they can remove them.
They can remove them. Yeah. Some people in the South do, it's called like permanents, but for the most part, they can be, you know, removed in and out. And they use dental gold to make grills. And so now, you know, so many places make them, but it primarily started in New York. Then Eddie moved to Atlanta. A lot of people associate grills with Atlanta hip hop, but that's because Eddie and his brother moved down there and opened Eddie's Golds. And it kind of spread, you know, through the States. And now his brother Lando runs Lando Golds out of Florida, another, you know, kind of place that is known for grills in the South. And Eddie still doing his thing in New York.
So it's just another place to get more diamonds.
Yes. Yeah.
Basically.
Or you can just get gold fronts, right? Just simple, old school.
And you refer in your book to the golden diamonds tied to the facets of Black culture that are very complex. So what do you mean by that? How do you see this complexity?
So, you know, when I was writing the book, I, of course, wanted to go deeper on what was the tie, right, between Africa, where, you know, a lot of artists have, you know, roots and connections, and the commodities. So many of the commodities come from there, right? Gold, diamonds, and their history, you know, in conflict, in also the role of, you know, gold in the way that like different kingdoms and communities used it to signify gold, Mansa Musa, you know, places where things are mined. So there were so many kind of complex, both greatness and a lot of, you know, negativity kind of associated with their history. And I thought it was really fascinating the way that, you know, hip hop artists, again, are like on the shoulders of that history, but also making it their own, redefining, you know, what it means.
Or reclaiming it, maybe reclaiming it for themselves.
And, you know, and also integrating elements of the culture through symbolism, right? Through Nefertiti pendants, ankhs. You know, Erykah Badu has a Ma'at grill. So it's also fascinating the symbols that they're bringing in that have, you know, traditions in Africa. And like you said, reclaiming and redefining and remixing that history, but also, you know, shining a light on that history too. I mean, a lot of artists have done songs about, you know, that complexity, which again, I think just kind of lends to the kind of amazingness and seriousness of hip hop and jewelry.
And do you think the men are more bedecked than the women in hip hop?
You know, it's funny because I would say hip hop has sort of been the one area where
they're the peacocks.
The men are the peacocks. I mean, Well, and look, this year's Met Gala theme is, dandies.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of amazing jewelry, there. But yes, so like the male artists have definitely are the ones that have been known for their like key pieces. But, I always say like the women, the Nicki Minaj Barbie pendant is right, over your shoulder.
Just looking at it in the case behind.
And the Roxanne Shante ring is in the show. We also have like, early pieces from designer April Walker. Her nameplate pendant is in the show. So, and then we also have some, young female jewelers that are really starting to design. Lillian Shalom, Bejewels. So women have always played a really important role here too, but
look, we're looking at the baby necklace here.
Yeah.
And who was that belong to?
Lil Baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's massive and it's in your face, and I just think the men's jewelry is just so much more powerful.
Yeah. I remember, it was a little bit of a controversy online because a couple artists like Future and, some other current artists started wearing their chains short, like a choker length. Mm-hmm. And people were saying like that's a traditionally like a female, style to like males have worn it, much longer and bigger. But now, I think the artists are just being more playful with their jewelry. And so they're starting to wear, brooches, shorter length. Some are, even like A$AP Rocky and Tyler started to wear pearls. And so all of this, is inevitably talked about in ways that they're, maybe breaking gender stereotypes, kind of having fun with those. But again, just pushing forward, remixing, and just having a lot of fun.
Well, A$AP Rocky bought a piece in Venice from Codonato. When they got a new creative director, Francesca Anvidietro, and her first big necklace, and this is sort of Venetian, ties to the Renaissance, all sorts of Venetian motifs, and he was the first person to buy her first necklace. Yeah. So really breaking out of that traditional look.
Rocky is someone really interesting. He grew up in New York. Mm-hmm. His mother named him after Rakim, the artist, that's his name, Rakim Myers, Rocky. And he is a student of New York style and New York hip hop jewelry. If you look, over your shoulder, you see him in some classic gold grills, no diamonds. He understands, the symbolism, like a classic pair of gold fronts, but he also understands the history of the jewelry, and to your point, is now kind of interacting with jewelers that maybe back in the day wouldn't have interacted with hip-hop artists. So that also just speaks to the mainstream power, the pop culture power of hip-hop, and really, in the words of Biggie, like, you never thought that hip-hop would take it this far.
And I wanted to ask about, going back to the females, the big bamboo hoops. What do you feel about the controversy that those have had? Because often in fashion they've been used, and people feel that it's not right, that it should be left to black women, and that white women should probably not wear or claim the bamboo hoops.
Yeah, the hoops and also the nameplates, right? Mm-hmm. The nameplate that became, the quote unquote Carrie necklace from Sex and the City also has roots in, Black and Latino communities. Mm. So that's been said about both of those. Hoops, of course, you look back, anyone that studies, jewelry history, they were, in the book, I show a pair of Fulani hoops, that originated in Africa. So that is definitely a tradition, that has been worn as, from African cultures. It's a tough question, right? Because things go into pop culture and into the zeitgeist and into, the way that people wear things. I mean, you could say that with so many items. So I don't know that I have a really clean answer for that. I see both points. I think when anyone, kind of gets inspired or borrows from a culture, it's important to also pay homage to that culture and make sure that, that culture is being respected in a way that is celebrated, the way that, this show really celebrates the jewelers, the originators, the artists that, in the communities really that came from. So I think that always has to be part of the conversation.
It has to be referenced.
Yeah.
And done with respect.
Yep.
Because we do love a hoop. We don't want to not be able to wear them. And then, as you said, very important that they found their own jewellers. That was very important to start with.
Yeah.
And now they're moving on.
Yeah, well, back in the day, the level of customization that hip hop artists wanted, a lot of mainstream jewelers just weren't doing.
So what kind of customization, for instance?
Your name on a giant, dookie rope that spells out, biz with, in different script. Or, a double-headed, eagle pendant that symbolizes the Dipset crew, laid with diamonds and, given to every member of the Dipset crew. So you couldn't walk into Tiffany back then and say, here's what I want, right? There were just certain jewelers that would do that and knew how to, speak that language. Ironically, and this might even be a whole separate, podcast, because this is another aspect of the book that I love and the show, is that a lot of those jewelers were immigrants or children of immigrants themselves. A lot from former Soviet Union, a lot from, South Korea, Suriname, I mentioned earlier. And, that's also part of that kind of New York story, that kind of those folks that were searching for the American dream were intersecting with these artists that were questioning who the American dream is for and going to reclaim it. And they came together and made these incredible pieces.
And I guess some of the words that were used, probably, as you said, in the 80s or 90s, probably weren't ones that safe brand were ever going to.
Well, a lot of them, a lot of them just were their names or their crew names or things like that. So,
but some of them were rude.
Probably, probably, yeah.
And now that's probably okay, but probably back in the 80s they probably balked at it, I imagine. And that's something I wanted to ask you, how the fashion has evolved. If you've been watching it so closely from 70s, 80s, 90s to now, how do you see it evolving?
Well, I just see hip hop really stepped into its power and made impact where, now every major fashion brand, every jewelry house is clamoring to have hip hop artists wear their pieces, collaborate. A$AP Ferg, who's a big part of the exhibit, he was the first ambassador for Tiffany, hip hop ambassador for Tiffany. And so, he was a kid that grew up going to high school and walking by Tiffany every day. And now, he holds this great, that inspires so many young people how to dress, how to be, what jewelry to wear. So I think hip hop in this moment is just a really incredible testament, right? From where it started, always being unapologetic about who it was and what it was, and what it had to say, to now having this big mainstream influence, I think is, a beautiful full 360 moment.
And they're not really branded, are they? I mean, they wouldn't go to the brands as such to have this jewelry. It has to be something more customized and individual.
Yeah, typically. I mean, but, a lot of the jewelers now are becoming their own brands. I mean, Alex Moss, who made Tyler's Igor piece, even Greg Una, who did this, this piece. I mean, a lot of the jewelers now, even though, they're not Cartier or Tiffany, but they are.
There's a Tiffany
brands.
T bracelet there.
Yeah, so this is Fur, who I was just referring to. You see him there with, at a Tiffany event, and they made that bracelet for him. which is the traditional Tiffany bracelet. Yeah. But then, you look right next to the Tiffany bracelet and you see Ferg's Lamborghini pendant, which was made by Ben Baller out of California. And that piece was made to commemorate a friend who passed away, who was the founder of the ASAP mob, of which, Ferg and Rocky were all part of. So that is like a memory, a commemorative pendant of someone who passed away, which is, another way that jewelry and hip hop is used, sort of to memorialize things and people that are no longer with us and, important to the culture. And also right above that, Joey Badass lent us this piece that has the photo of a friend of his who passed away, Capital Steez.
With a crown. So these are all for performance. Are they just worn for performance, or do they wear them?
Oh no, these are for every day.
These are for every day. They're just unbelievable. But heavy.
Yes.
Heavy.
Yes. They're quite significant, they're for performance and for every day, but certainly some pieces might be a little too heavy if worn for too long, which is a good thing, maybe.
Go home to rest the jewelry.
Yes, although, the ghost face cuff, I think you could just kick back, watch a little TV in that. Good for every day.
Tell me about the £10 million diamond necklace that Alex Moss made. Was that for Drake?
Oh, you're thinking of the engagements. Right. Yes. That was, so, that's, the previous engagements necklace, which is not in the show, but we have a different piece from Drake. But that piece, was made to kind of utilize, multiple engagement rings, like diamonds from different engagement rings, supposedly symbolizing all the times that Drake thought about proposing to someone. So again, just another way that, artists and jewelers work together to think of different concepts and then, have the amazingness and audacity to actually create those things. I mean, that was a very clever, very funny, I think, piece to make.
It's quite funny because there was the Hollywood actress Paulette Goddard back in the kind of 40s. She had a long diamond Riviere necklace and somebody said, "What's that about?" And she said, "I got engaged so many times and I never gave the diamond back." And she kept it and had this necklace. So it's the kind of the male equivalent, really, isn't it? And how do you see the female jewelry developing now? What do you expect to come next, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so women artists in hip hop have really, taken bigger control of their careers as women kind of progressed in their power in hip hop and today are very much in charge of their careers, their image. The jewelry has been really fun to watch. If you think about Nicki's Barbie pendant that she had made in the 2000s, and you fast forward to pieces like Beyonce's nail rings made by the jeweler Bejewels, or even the Cardi B like nipple covers, or Erykah Badu's grills that use opals and, a lot of like symbolism. The women are really pushing the envelope with design, kind of different things beyond just, necklaces and rings. Just like, they are in their music, really pushing boundaries. So that's what I love, that the jewelry really reflects their real personalities in their music.
Do you think the next stage will be if they're so involved in design that they'll design a line, a collection for other people?
Who knows? Yeah. I could see it, especially with like Ferg, Rocky. I mean, really, with so many artists in the show, I could definitely see them designing.
And it's called Ice Cold because they always talk about diamonds as ice.
Yeah, ice cold also is like a phrase, right? That I think it was like around even in like the 70s and 80s. It was like, oh, that's cool. That's cold, that's ice cold. That's considered like a compliment. Or, Outcast was like, what's cooler than being cool? Ice cold. So it's a play on words, right? It's diamonds, it's bling, but it's also a compliment of just looking really good.
Do you have a favorite piece in the show?
Oh my gosh, it's like picking children. I definitely have a few favorites, for different reasons. The Tyler piece, the bellhop piece that by Alex Moss is a favorite of mine.
And what's the story behind that, the bellhop?
This was a piece that Tyler had made when he was making his album Igor. And, if you know Tyler and his music, he always goes really deep on character and motifs. And, that album had a lot of kind of motifs of like travel and, these kinds of like elements of like suitcases and traveling and what that means. And if you look at his imagery from that time, he was dressed in all these kind of like very dandy suits and things like that. And so the bellhop sort of went with that whole motif. So he commissioned that to kind of go with that album and some of the things that he was thinking about. Yeah. But I love it, because it uses so many different colors, materials. He's got sapphires in there and blue and pink and yeah, it's really a fun piece.
That's one of your favorites.
It's one of my favorites. But, I'd say my other favorite, of course, is the Run DMC Adidas chain pendant, because one of the members of Run DMC, Jam Master Jay, passed away, was murdered several years ago. That piece has stayed with his son, who lent us for the show. So that piece is really special. Because it's all the way back from the 80s and just, a piece that was very much associated with Run DMC and, and the artist. So, the pieces have so much memory and so much storytelling in them, both good and bad. So, whether you're being inspired for an album,
as jewelry always is,
right? Or whether you're commemorating someone that passed, or whatever it is, the jewels really hold bigger story.
And it's kind of full circle that the music came, the jewelry came. Now the jewelry's in the music, so it's all together.
Yeah, it's holistic, as they say.
Well, congratulations, Vikki. It's a fantastic exhibition. If anyone gets a chance to be in New York, they should come and see it. It sort of opens up a whole new idea about the genre that, some people aren't really aware of, as well as the music.
Well, and I'll just add quickly that it's in the Hall of Gems and Minerals, which, if you come in and you see that permanent collection and, you can be educated about the history of gems and minerals and how they're made. But then you step in here, which is like a, jewel box size exhibit of hip hop and jewelry. It gives you this great perspective, which is why I love, having it in this museum of hip hop in the context of our long humanity and how, these commodities have been used. So it's a really special thing to have it, in this museum too.
You're right. It's that sort of ancient connotation of what is outside that took billions of years to grow in the earth, and how modern it can be.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. For this and other episodes of If Jewels Could Talk, please go to our website, carolwoolton.com/podcasts. Do share it any way you can, and we love to have a rating and a comment. And don't forget, if you've got a book voucher or anything to spend at the end of the year following the holiday season, the If Jewels Could Talk book is on sale now. Join me again for the next Jeweled Nugget, when we've got a special episode which was recorded in New York in the Verdura showroom, when I'm actually interviewed by Ward Landrigan, one of our favourite guests. I was invited into the Verdura showroom to meet a large group of their clients, guests, journalists, to talk about the book If Jewels Could Talk, and managed to ask him a few questions about Elizabeth Taylor in the process. So do join us then. And thank you for listening. Goodbye. If Jewels Could Talk with Carol Woolton is produced by Natasha Cowan, music and editing by Tim Thornton, graphics by Scott Bentley, illustration by Jordi Labanda. You can find our sponsors at fullygemstones.com and me at carolwoolton.com.